Sometimes the most tragic stories don't start with evil intentions. They begin with a prank, a mistake, a moment of fear, or a desperate decision. In these 5 real-life stories, an impulsive act spirals into irreversible disaster. It was July 8, 2019 in the city of Erzurum, Turkey. The streets buzzed with the usual summer life, cars honking, kids running in the shade, and people trying to stay cool under umbrellas and awnings. But far from the crowds, inside a quiet home, 24-year-old Zafer Kuzu was about to do something dangerous, something that would shock his community and end his life. Zafer had been in trouble. He'd gotten into a serious fight that left someone injured. Instead of going to prison, a judge gave him a second chance, community service. It wasn't fun, but it wasn't jail either. All he had to do was help out the city for a while, maybe clean streets, paint walls, or assist at local buildings. But Zafer didn't want to do any of that. He felt like it was too embarrassing, too tiring. He wanted out. Then an idea popped into his head. A bad idea. What if he could fake an accident? What if he could get hurt, just enough to be sent to the hospital, and skip the punishment completely? To Zafer, this seemed clever, but what came next would be anything but smart. He called up 2 of his friends, Arda, who was just 18, and Melo, a little older. These were kids who trusted Zafer, who probably didn't realize how serious things were about to get. Zafer told them his plan. He wanted to get shot, not with a toy, with a real shotgun. Arda and Melo were shocked. "You're kidding, right?" they probably asked. But Zafer was serious. He believed that if he could survive the blast, it would land him in the hospital, and he'd get out of community service. To protect himself, he strapped 2 big, puffy pillows to his back. They were regular household pillows, the kind you sleep on at night. He thought they'd cushion the blow. It wasn't armor. It wasn't tested. But Zafer had already made up his mind. They set it up in a quiet room, maybe in someone's home or backyard. No ambulance waiting, no doctor on call. Just 3 young men about to do something horribly wrong. Zafer stood with his back turned. He told Arda to aim carefully. Arda gripped the shotgun with shaky hands. His heart was probably racing. He took a breath, then pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening. The blast shook the room. Shotguns don't fire one single bullet. They fire dozens of tiny metal balls called pellets. And at close range, those pellets hit with full force, spreading out fast and wide. Zafer's pillows. They didn't stand a chance. The blast tore through the fabric, through the feathers, and straight into Zafer's back. He screamed, collapsed. Blood soaked through his clothes. Panic filled the room. Arda dropped the shotgun, shaking. Melo ran over to Zafer, yelling his name. But Zafer couldn't speak. He was in shock, struggling to breathe, losing blood fast. They didn't call an ambulance right away. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they didn't want to get in trouble. But every second mattered, and time was running out. By the time help was finally called, it was too late. Zafer had already died. When emergency services arrived, the scene was chaotic. Zafer's lifeless body was on the ground. The shotgun was seized. Police arrested Arda on the spot. Melo was taken in for questioning. Zafer's body was sent to a forensic lab in Istanbul for a full autopsy. His wounds told the full story. Close-range blast, no protection, and 0 chance of survival. News spread quickly. A young man had lost his life in the most senseless way, trying to get out of community service. People were shocked, confused, and heartbroken. How could someone believe this was a good idea? Authorities later confirmed that the plan had no chance of working. The court never would have excused someone for a self-inflicted injury. Zafer's entire plan had been built on a lie, and it cost him everything. Now, instead of completing a simple punishment, Zafer was gone. Arda faced legal consequences for pulling the trigger. Melo's life was also changed forever. 3 lives, 1 reckless decision. But the story of Zafer Kuzu isn't the only case where a split-second decision turned into a life-altering tragedy. In Lee Malin's story, a simple accident, just like dropping a phone, unleashes a terrifying chain of events that no one saw coming. It was January 7, 2014 in Xinjiang City, China, a bustling town where traditional life met the modern world, when a seemingly trivial event quickly turned into a nightmare. Li Meilan, a 32-year-old woman, was visiting her husband's family for a quiet day. She had just used an open-pit toilet. a common sight in rural parts of China, where a simple structure with a hole in the ground was used for waste disposal. As she rose from the toilet, her brand new phone, a shiny, expensive device worth 2,000 yuan, roughly $320, slipped from her hand and fell straight into the deep pit below, disappearing into the muck. Now, for most people, this would have been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. It was just a phone after all. But for Meilan, it was a catastrophe. The phone wasn't just an expensive item. It was a symbol of her hard work and her connection to the world beyond the village. There was no way she could let it go. Without a second thought, she called her husband for help, her voice filled with urgency and desperation. Her husband, knowing how much this phone meant to her, didn't hesitate. He rushed over, thinking that retrieving the phone would be an easy task. But as he jumped into the pit, something went terribly wrong. The pit, a deep, dark hole filled with the remnants of human waste, also held something far more dangerous: toxic fumes. A mixture of gases, invisible but deadly, filled the air. As soon as he landed, the fumes overwhelmed him, and he collapsed, losing consciousness almost immediately. His body, vulnerable and unprepared, succumbed to the toxic air. Li Meilan, helpless and panicked, could only stand there for a brief moment, staring in horror at her husband. But what she didn't know was that the fumes, while invisible to the naked eye, were lethal. The toxic air, which had caused her husband to collapse, would soon claim others. Her mother-in-law, seeing her son fall into unconsciousness, screamed and rushed to his aid, but the pit offered no mercy. She too jumped in, desperate to save him. Just like her son, she was overcome by the gases and fell unconscious, crumpling to the ground beside him. Meilan, standing on the edge of the pit, could only watch as the situation spiraled out of control. Her mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. What could she do? Who could she call for help? But time was running out. The more she thought, the more she realized that if she didn't act, it would be too late. Driven by love and fear, she made the decision to climb into the pit. The moment her feet touched the ground, the thick, suffocating fumes hit her hard. She didn't have time to scream, didn't have time to call out for help. The gases filled her lungs, and in mere seconds, she too collapsed, unconscious and vulnerable. Now the entire family was trapped. The father-in-law, standing helplessly by the side, could only watch in horror. His family members, once full of life, were now lying unconscious in the filthy pit. He could feel his heart racing as he tried to figure out a way to save them. But what could he do? How could he rescue them from the pit of death? In a final, desperate act of love and fear, he jumped in as well. But just like the others, he was overpowered by the toxic gases and fell unconscious, adding to the growing list of victims in the pit. Time seemed to slow down. As the toxic fumes swirled around the pit, everyone who had jumped in was now lying unconscious in the muck. But outside, the neighbors were beginning to hear the commotion. The sound of people yelling, shouting for help must have reached their ears. Quickly, they gathered together, not knowing the full scope of the danger, but understanding that something was very wrong. Without wasting a moment, they ran to the pit, determined to help. But even as they tried to rescue the family, they weren't safe. The toxic air had no mercy, and it soon began to affect the rescuers. One neighbor, despite his best efforts, collapsed, fainting from the overwhelming fumes. Panic set in as they realized that this was far more dangerous than they had initially thought. The neighbors, however, didn't give up. They lowered ropes into the pit, one by one, carefully pulling each family member to safety. It felt like hours, but finally the entire family and the two neighbors were pulled out of the pit. But by that time, the damage was done. Meilan's husband and mother-in-law had died from the exposure. Their bodies had simply been overwhelmed by the toxic fumes in such a short amount of time. Meilan, her father-in-law, and the two neighbors were alive, but barely. They were rushed to the hospital, all of them in critical condition. Despite the quick response, it was clear that the loss was already irreversible. Authorities quickly arrived, investigating the situation and trying to piece together what had happened. They found that the family had only been in the pit for about 5 minutes, but that was more than enough time for the gases to do their damage. If help had arrived just a few minutes earlier, maybe, just maybe, the outcome would have been different. But the truth was that the damage was done, and nothing could bring back the lives lost. The community was left in shock, unable to comprehend how a simple act of retrieving a phone had led to such a devastating loss. Milan's uncle, overwhelmed by grief, could hardly believe what had happened. He stood in disbelief, asking over and over, "What are we supposed to do now?" His words, full of pain and confusion, echoed through the quiet town. The phone, the very object that had caused this entire tragedy, was never found. And by the time anyone had thought to search for it, it no longer mattered. The real tragedy was the lives lost, the family torn apart by a decision that, in hindsight, seemed so small. Lee Malin, now left without her husband and mother-in-law, would forever carry the weight of that moment with her. But sometimes, even the strongest bonds between people are shattered by something darker than we could ever imagine. In Jaipur, India, an act of desperation would spiral into a deadly conflict that no one saw coming. It was December 12, 2021, a seemingly ordinary Sunday afternoon in Jaipur, India. The kind of quiet day where everything seemed peaceful, where people went about their business with no sign of what was about to unfold. For Mohsin, a 29-year-old man from Uttar Pradesh, this was supposed to be just another day spent with his partner and her young daughter in their new apartment. But it was far from ordinary. What began as a normal day quickly escalated into a disaster that would forever change their lives. For the past 2 years, Mohsin had been living with a secret that was bound to catch up with him. His partner, a woman who had once been married to another man, had eloped with him, severing all ties with her previous life. They had made a new life together, but her husband never stopped searching for her. For 2 long years, he relentlessly searched for his wife and daughter, trying to find where they had gone and bring them back. But on that fateful afternoon, his search came to an end. The husband showed up at Mohsin's apartment. What happened inside is still shrouded in mystery. No one knows for sure what words were exchanged in those tense moments. But Mohsin's reaction was one of pure panic. He had been dreading this moment for 2 years, and now that it had finally arrived, he couldn't handle it. His heart raced, his mind spiraled out of control, and instead of standing his ground and facing the man who had come to reclaim his family, he did the unthinkable. In a blind, panic-driven moment, Mohsin made a rash decision. He rushed to the balcony and, without hesitation, jumped. The sound of his body hitting the ground below was like a sickening crash in the silence of the afternoon. The fall from the 5th floor was harrowing, the impact so severe that it left him gravely injured. His partner, who had been watching the entire thing unfold, screamed in terror. She ran to his side, her heart pounding as she tried to help him, to save him from the terrible decision he had just made. In a frantic attempt to save him, she rushed him to SMS Government Hospital, hoping against all odds that he would survive. But the injuries were too grave. Mohsin's body was broken, and no amount of medical intervention could undo the damage. That night, despite the hospital's best efforts, Mohsin passed away. His desperate attempt to avoid a confrontation had ultimately cost him his life, and his partner was left shattered, holding on to the pieces of a broken future. The following day, Mohsin's body was sent for a post-mortem examination. Authorities examined the scene, trying to piece together what had happened. But it wasn't just Mohsin's tragic end that left everyone unsettled. It was the strange disappearance of the woman and her husband that added even more layers of mystery to the story. They vanished, without a trace. No one knew where they had gone, or why they disappeared so suddenly, leaving investigators with even more questions than answers. Was it fear that drove them away, or something darker? What was clear, however, was that Mohsin's reaction was driven by pure fear. Instead of confronting the situation head-on, he had made an impulsive, life-ending decision in a moment of panic. His choice was irreversible, and the consequences were devastating for everyone involved. Mohsin had been running from his past for 2 years, but it caught up to him faster than he could ever imagine. In the days leading up to the incident, Mohsin and his partner had moved into a new apartment near NRY Circle, hoping for a fresh start, away from the chaos of their past life. But despite their hopes, the peace they had searched for was fleeting. The past, it seemed, was always just a step behind, waiting to pounce. Now, with Mohsin gone and the woman and her husband missing, the story became even more confusing. What was meant to be a new chapter for Mohsin and his partner ended in tragedy. The fear that led to Mohsin's fatal decision had turned a simple encounter into a nightmare. And now, with so many questions left unanswered, the full story might never come to light. The tragedy of Mohsin's final moments left behind a trail of broken hearts, confusion, and unanswered questions. But sometimes, the darkest stories emerge from the most unexpected places, like an innocent father-daughter trip to the Grand Canyon, where a simple joke would take a deadly turn. It was November 28, 1992, when Greg Austin Gingrich, the kind of dad who could always make you laugh, took his teenage daughter on a trip to the Grand Canyon. To anyone who knew Greg, it was no surprise. He was famous for his pranks, always playing jokes that had people rolling with laughter. His daughter loved him for it. They shared a close bond, one built on laughter, adventure, and those unforgettable moments that would make both of them smile for years. They were a team, always in sync with each other's humor. But little did they know, this trip would take a tragic turn, one that would leave their world shattered forever. The Grand Canyon, a place so majestic and vast that it leaves people speechless. Towering cliffs, deep valleys, and rock formations that stretch for miles and miles, painted in reds, oranges, and browns by the setting sun. It's a place that attracts millions of visitors every year. But for all its beauty, the Grand Canyon also has a dark side. Its dangerous edges and steep cliffs that can be a trap for those who don't respect them. Greg, though, wasn't thinking about danger. He was thinking about fun. And in his mind, fun meant pulling off one of his classic pranks. Standing near the edge of a guard wall with the canyon stretched out before him, Greg had a mischievous grin on his face. His daughter had seen these jokes before. She knew him well. But this time, would be different. Greg had planned it perfectly. He would pretend to lose his balance and stumble, flailing his arms wildly as if he was about to fall. The goal was to scare his daughter just for a second. Then, he'd land safely on a small slope below, springing up and laughing. "Gotcha," he'd say, making it clear it was all a joke. It would be one of those moments that would go down in family history, the kind they'd laugh about for years to come. But this time, something went horribly wrong. What Greg hadn't realized was how close the drop really was, and how far the slope was from where he stood. His idea of a harmless prank turned into a nightmare. Greg slipped. Just like that, his foot lost grip on the edge, and suddenly he was falling. His body twisted in the air as the ground below seemed to rush up to meet him. The canyon that had once felt so vast and beautiful now felt like a trap. His arms flailed, trying to grab hold of something, anything, but the force of the fall was too strong. It all happened so fast. One moment, he was there, goofing off, and the next, he was gone. His daughter, walking ahead a few steps, turned around with a smile. She was used to his jokes. She was probably waiting for him to pop up from below the ledge, laughing it off as he always did. But when she looked back and saw no sign of him, her smile quickly faded. "Dad," she called out, her voice trembling. She waited, thinking he was just messing around, but the seconds turned into minutes. Something was wrong. Her heart began to race. She ran back to the edge, peering down, calling his name louder, panic creeping into her voice. She couldn't see him. The canyon seemed so vast, so endless, like it had swallowed him whole. Then, the park rangers arrived. They began searching the area, combing through the rocky cliffs and the paths below. The air was thick with tension as they radioed each other, calling in reinforcements. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. And then, in the distance, one of the rangers spotted something. Greg's body at the bottom of the canyon. The fall had been nearly 400 feet. The family was left in complete shock. His daughter, standing at the edge, couldn't believe it. One moment she had been laughing with her dad, sharing a joke. The next, he was gone. The grief and disbelief flooded over her. The world around her felt like it had shattered. The tragedy was not just the loss of Greg, but the way it all unfolded. Greg had always been careful. He knew the Grand Canyon. He'd been there before. He never imagined his own prank would be the one thing that took him down. Nature, unforgiving and powerful, doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't care about your jokes. It simply reacts to your actions. His daughter was left with the painful memory of her father, gone in an instant. The man who had always made her laugh. The man who could do anything for her. was gone because of a simple, impulsive decision. Greg's story became a cautionary tale for many. It reminded people of the dangers of the Grand Canyon and how a simple lapse in judgment could lead to tragedy. It was a painful lesson learned too late, but one that would not be forgotten. But not all moments of tragedy happen in such dramatic ways. Some occur in places where you least expect it. Just like Greg, Maddox Lamar's split-second decision in a seemingly safe spot would end in a nightmare that would haunt their family forever. It was November 4th, 2012, a day like any other at the Pittsburgh Zoo and PPG Aquarium. The animals were out, visitors were enjoying the sights, and 2-year-old Maddox Lamar Durkosh was there with his parents, Jason and Elizabeth. They were having a great time, exploring the zoo and soaking in the sights. But little did they know, this trip would end in a way none of them could ever have imagined. Maddox, just a toddler, was full of excitement. His eyes lit up at the sight of the African-painted dogs in their enclosure. The zoo had a special viewing platform for these dogs, raised about 4 feet off the ground. Visitors could look down into the enclosure, getting a great view of the animals. But this platform, designed to offer a closer look, was also risky, especially for small children. Elizabeth, wanting Maddox to see the dogs better, lifted him onto the platform's railing. It seemed like a harmless move. After all, many parents had done the same thing before. They held their kids up to get a better look at the animals. But there were warning signs. Signs that urged caution and reminded people of the dangers. But in the excitement of the moment, Elizabeth didn't think twice. Suddenly, Maddox lost his balance. In an instant, he slipped from her grasp. Time seemed to freeze as he fell. He tumbled 14 feet, missing the safety net below, the one meant to catch small objects, not a child. And just like that, Maddox landed right in the middle of the African-painted dog exhibit. The world seemed to slow down, but the horror was only just beginning. The dogs, startled and confused by the sudden movement, began to react. They circled around him, unsure of what had just fallen into their midst. Within seconds, the situation turned terrifying. The zoo staff responded as fast as they could, rushing to the scene, but they couldn't get to Maddox in time. A police officer, desperate to stop the attack, fired a shot at one of the dogs, trying to scare them away. But it was too late. Maddox had already suffered fatal injuries. The crowd was in shock. The zoo's staff worked quickly to contain the remaining animals, and the African-painted dogs were moved to another facility. The exhibit was immediately closed, but the damage had already been done. For Maddox's family, the nightmare was far from over. Elizabeth faced harsh criticism for lifting Maddox onto the railing, but authorities deemed it a tragic accident. The family believed the zoo had ignored safety concerns, as staff had noted the risks since 2006. While the zoo insisted it met all safety standards, the public was divided. The case was settled out of court. In the aftermath, the zoo removed the dangerous platform and relocated the painted dogs. To honor Maddox, his family started a toy truck donation drive, which became a nationwide success, ensuring his memory lived on and touching many hearts far beyond the zoo. Thanks for watching. These stories show how fast life can change in a single moment. Click here for more real events that took a shocking turn.